Now I'll start again. Welcome, everybody. As Mindy said, my name is Denise Fowler, and I am the Director of Career Development and Alumni Services for the Trachtenberg School. In May, it'll be 13 years that I will have been here. I've spent 20 years in career development work at a previous school, 10 years in public service, and most relevant to this panel, I am a National Service alum myself. We were just speaking about, I was in the very first class of AmeriCorps Vistas that I stood in line on March 1st, 1993, when Bill Clinton unveiled AmeriCorps to my undergraduate school. So I have been involved in national service in many, many levels. I was the career coach. So I am a very, very big proponent of the role of national service and the skills that you get and how it translates to our degrees at our graduate school. So I am absolutely thrilled to be here today. If you're in a position right now where you can turn on your camera, please do. It's always wonderful for our panelists to see faces. I understand not everybody is going to be in a position where they can do that. After their initial introductions, where they're going to talk about their current work and their national service experience and how that plays into what they've learned and what they're doing, we will be opening this up to questions. And while I certainly could ask some questions, this is really a chance for all of you. I know some of you might be admitted students, some of you might be prospective students, but a chance for you to gain some valuable insights from our incredible alum. So Emma, you were the first one to log on, so you're on my screen at the top. I am going to start with you to share a little bit more.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. My name is Emma Dewhurst, and I'm a Senior Program and Research Associate at the de Beaumont Foundation, which is a private foundation located in Bethesda, Maryland. De Beaumont is focused on making public health work better to strengthen communities, with a particular focus on supporting state and local governmental public health workers. So my role here is a mix of evaluation, project management, and research. Primarily, I conduct and translate research and evaluation to strengthen the foundation's impact. I graduated from Trachtenberg in 2022 with a master's in public policy and a concentration in program eval and policy analysis. And in my time at GW, I was a staff writer for Policy Perspectives, which is a great resource for students to write about policies that they care about. And I was also a Women's Leadership Fellow. But before moving to DC for school, I was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer at a social services agency in Cincinnati, Ohio, as a GED tutor. And I absolutely loved my year in AmeriCorps, and where I was volunteering so much that I actually applied for and got a full-time job at the organization upon finishing my year of volunteering. So I worked as a case manager for 2 years, helping connect clients to community resources in areas like housing, criminal justice, education. And I really love this work, but I realized that I wasn't able to help my clients in the way that I wanted to or thought I should be able to because of systemic issues and policy barriers, which is really when I decided to go back to school for my degree in public policy.
Fantastic. We're going to next go over to Ellie out on the West Coast.
Hi, everyone. So great to be with you today. Yes, I'm Ellie Klein, joining from Seattle. I currently work at AIR, the American Institutes for Research, which is a large research organization that does work on behalf of federal, state, and local governments, as well as philanthropy in health, education, and international development. I work for a part of the organization called the AIR Opportunity Fund, which is a philanthropy that sits inside of AIR. So we give grants internally to AIR researchers as well as externally with the goal to advance evidence to improve lives. I've been here for a little over a year and a half and graduated from Trachtenberg in 2014. I got my master's in public administration with a focus on program evaluation. I started my career as an AmeriCorps member right out of college in Seattle, just south of Seattle in Federal Way, Washington, where I was working in the Federal Way Public School District. And while I was there, I felt like I wanted to have a better understanding and grounding of the American education system and some of the system-wide barriers and opportunities to improve education for our nation's students. So with that in mind, I first spent a year teaching English in Spain, then went to GW, and then during my time there, had a variety of internships and then jobs after at the Brookings Institution, the Aspen Institute, the Government Accountability Office, the Gates Foundation, and then a public sector consulting firm called Alvarez and Marsal before I landed here. So I like to say I've had many, many lives, and happy to talk about all of them and how Trachtenberg and AmeriCorps sort of influenced that path.
Fantastic. And just as a reminder to all of you on today's, all the participants, we, as the Trachtenberg School, provides career services for life to our alumni. So Ellie and I continue to have conversations through. It's wonderful to hear a career path as we work together. We support our students and alumni extensively. Trevor, we're going to move. We go from the West Coast back here to DC.
Sure, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trevor Schmutz. I work at Serve DC, which is the Mayor's Office on Volunteerism and Partnerships. For those who are maybe a little more in the trenches of the AmeriCorps world, you may know that across the country, each state has what's called a State Service Commission. We sort of operate as that for the district. So my role within this office is the National Service Officer. I really am focused on and instrumental in ensuring operational success, financial stability, and member support services for a portfolio of right now 10 AmeriCorps operational programs, state and national programs. I have sort of a meandering career that began very much not in this space, in the art world, working in nonprofit development for arts organizations, sort of fresh out of college, and then moved into food and hospitality for a bit before kind of finding a culmination of interests in both service and also in policy and sort of research and you know, calculated choice making and data-driven choice making, which is sort of how I ended up at the Trachtenberg School. I just felt like the program design was really great and really kind of spoke to some of the interests I had at the time. I did my AmeriCorps Vista year in with an organization based in Silver Spring, Maryland. It sort of coincided with a portion of my master's work at GW, and the two kind of really informed one another in a lot of great ways. So it was kind of getting like dual learning and work at the same time, which was great. And yeah, I'm really happy to be with you all today and looking forward to hearing some questions.
Fantastic. And next, we're going to go down to the next person on my screen is Reagan.
Hi, all. I'm excited to be with you today. As Denise mentioned, my name is Regan Wadenoya. I'm a senior manager within Deloitte's Government and Public Services practice. For those that don't know, Deloitte GPS is our federal, state, and local management consulting arm of kind of the larger Deloitte firms. I'm specifically serving clients within our federal space in human capital specifically, so helping, talent offices reimagine the way that they, bring in the right recruits to the federal government and the right technology to do that. At GPS, we serve every agency across the federal government in a variety of ways, so lots of great opportunity there. And we're usually solving some of the more wicked problems that the government faces every day. My journey to get here, I actually began my government career as a public administration undergrad. So 2 degrees in the same thing, which is always funny. I had a passion at the time for state and local government, was weighing, the law school dilemma, as I know a lot of people did. And instead of making a knee-jerk reaction, I decided to do a year of AmeriCorps Vista, which was one of the greatest decisions that I made. I served in Vermont for 2 statewide coalitions, for the Homelessness Coalition and the Affordable Housing Coalition. which reinvigorated my passion for public service and brought me to Trachtenberg. Again, another goal was to stay in the government coming out of Trachtenberg. That was a little tricky in the year that I graduated, not a lot of federal jobs out there. But I did do a lot of internships both with the federal government and with management consulting firms, and realized that I could make the most change for me personally within management consulting. So I began my career right out of grad school at Deloitte about 10 years ago. I use my Trachtenberg and my AmeriCorps experience every single day to help my clients think about who they're serving more than just, a random entity. So I bring kind of that local government, local nonprofit perspective to things like, the federal government solving how much housing need a public authority needs, that calculation to, what type of technology do we need to put in place to make sure funding gets to our USDA programs, our food nutrition programs, those things. So very pivotal in my career and has made me a better, advisor to my clients.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Regan. And India, back here in DC.
Hey, good afternoon now, everyone. India Daniels. Let's see, where do I start? I started with AmeriCorps Vista fresh out of undergrad. I went to Howard University for undergrad. And at first I was working in a number of DC homeless shelters as coordinators, and then I went on to become a manager for a homeless shelter, a women's shelter. I did that for about 2 years, and then I subsequently did a couple of AmeriCorps roles, served on 2 administrations for the inaugural events or the inaugurations for Barack Obama, which was an incredible experience, by the way. And then I moved on to come to George Washington eventually to get my master's in public policy. All the while doing that, I had moved on to work for the district government in employee and labor relations. And I subsequently became the labor relations officer for DC Fire and EMS, the nation's first responder system with firefighters and paramedics. And I would say, that's just a snapshot. I've now moved on from the district government. I worked at DC Health for a little while doing their labor relations, but then I was recently tapped to be the labor relations administrator for the city of Richmond, making sure that their firefighters, police officers, electrical workers, and management systems are negotiating correctly. Collective bargaining is very new to Virginia. They recently passed legislation for collective bargaining. And so a number of towns and cities are now, uploading labor relations administrators for various counties, which is exciting times for us. I've lived in Virginia probably for the past 20 years, and I've always worked in the district. And now I get to serve Virginia in the same capacity and with all of the training and skill set that I've come to learn. So, AmeriCorps Vista was the start of my career and really the start of government for me. But I utilized all the tools that I learned through the various service projects that I've been on to incorporate into my government roles. Whether it's thinking compassionately for others, that's a huge thing that AmeriCorps Vista taught me. Working collaboratively with others. The list can go on and on. Customer service, and just service. That's always been at the core of me. And I think that has lended its hand to the various roles that I've been in over the past decade.
Fantastic. I love these introductions. There's a lot of questions going into my head that I could follow up and ask, but I really would like to use this as an opportunity to open this up to our participants. If you have some questions, you can either raise your hand or put them into the chat. Mindy is monitoring the chat. I'm monitoring the chat. If you have some specific questions for one of our panelists, for all of our panelists, I give a pause before I go into questions because I could certainly ask them.
I have a question. Sorry, I'm at school at the school I work at right now, and the Wi-Fi is really bad. So if I cut out, I apologize. But my question is kind of, well, during your time at GW, how did you notice that like your service set you apart from your peers, like in your classes or in when it came to find internships or things like that? How do you feel like your service set you apart from the other classmates that you had?
Who would like to chime in?
I'm happy to talk about that. It's a great question because I think that when I was at GW, I was a little self-conscious of like, do I have enough research background? You know, I really just have this direct service experience. And I think that Denise actually taught me to flip that and be like, oh, I do have this on the ground experience. So when we're talking about policies or large organizations, I am able to give some perspective into implementation and maybe whether or not something would work, why it would or would not work. And then also just this mindset that data are people. You know, when you go into policy and you take your stats class, you see a lot of numbers. And I think my AmeriCorps experience and what set me apart is being like, oh, these data are actually, they're people. They represent people. They have stories. And so really uplifting that experience and that mindset, I think did set me apart from some of my peers.
And I would echo what Emma said from like a job and career perspective too. It sets you apart because there's no other role like this where you're thrown into sometimes 1 year of service where you're supposed to make a massive impact, and you normally do. Like we're all, so inspired by the work, so we want to make a huge impact, and not a lot of people have that story. Like other people had maybe intro level jobs. Well, as an AmeriCorps, you pretty much had to like run a nonprofit or, implement some kind of NCCC project that, had a year to do. So it's kind of what Emma said, leveraging the narrative behind it of like, you've done more in that year and all of these different types of skills in that 1 year than anyone else has in 1 year or two.
Yeah, I would ditto both of those things. And I sort of think of my AmeriCorps year as my like North Star or grounding, which it sometimes was frustrating. I was like, I wish I could be like everyone else and just be like, okay, ho hum, I'm like doing this job or taking this class. But similarly, I kept thinking about how the data are people and how, sometimes too, it like navigated my career for me at Brookings. I was the only person in the education research shop who had ever worked in a classroom. And like there at that time, a decade ago, that wasn't seen as necessarily a positive. They all had, like their PhDs from Harvard. But for me, I was like, is this report actually answering the questions that students and teachers have? Like, is this ultimately going to serve the people that I was with 2 years ago? And that's sort of always the question that I asked myself in my career and really prompted a lot of career moves of like trying to get to that original impetus when I was in the classroom of like, how could this be better on a national scale? And how could I play a part in that?
Yeah, I would echo what everyone said. I think service in AmeriCorps makes you more confident in what you're doing, even when you don't really know what you're doing. When I first came into the program and, was deciding whether I wanted to be an MPA or a Master's Public Administration major versus public policy, I went the policy route because I was so intrigued on the impact of data on real-time problems. Um, it sounded great to me, but when I stepped into the program, it was like, what am I doing? I have no idea what this is. I had never done analysis. My background is in art. I mean, I went to Howard for theater arts and then, moved on from there. But it was the idea that, okay, we don't quite know what we're doing, but we're all in this together and we're gonna figure it out. That was leverage, like someone said. I used that leverage to continue on. I looked at it as another project and I asked questions comfortably. I signed up with tutors comfortably. And I think that confidence And also the idea that you're in it for a mission and for a purpose, ultimately to get your master's degree, but leveraging that background that you have, whether it be various projects and experience you have, but also just the narrative that you get while you're working in projects. You know, working for the homeless is a thankless job in a lot of respect. And seeing it from the other side, from the policy side, and coming up and developing solutions from that side helped me not only appreciate what I did before, but also it was like a way that I could give back from the policy perspective. And so, yeah.
I love, oh, Trevor, go on.
Sorry, I'll be quick.
No, take your time, take your time.
I think one thing that is coming to mind in what I'm hearing from everyone else, and that I sort of felt certainly throughout my time at Trachtenberg, was a feeling of resilience within me. I think as you do national service work, you recognize that like you're struggling for resources, you're struggling with time, and you're like really working hard and doing tough stuff. And it is a lot of times feels thankless. I think that experience allowed me to like dig in those moments where I was not understanding something in one of my classes, and I could figure out ways to access the resources I needed to really like get where I needed to with the kind of learning that needed to happen in that space. And most importantly, acknowledge that you are in a degree program. You're there to learn. You shouldn't know everything coming in.
I love what you just said, Trevor. I always think about the national service motto of getting things done, right? Like you just figure out how to get things done, often in under-resourced, understaffed, under-resourced, and you figure it out. I remember once I was at a job and I opened it up and there was a supply closet and they were laughing at me that I was so excited by all the supplies. And I was like, you know how to get things done when you do national service with very little. I love the question that came in. I think that this is a question that I often get in career advising from both students and alumni. And I'm gonna massage this question just a little bit even broader, is how do you keep in touch with the tangible aspects, and not just in corporate settings, but as you rise up through the ranks, right? Even in all sectors. And this is something that if you choose our school, you will hear me always say, you have to be sector agnostic. So this is not corporate. Like you need, in this day and age, you have to be able to pivot in different roles. And we do both academically and in career services. We're always looking at how are we preparing you to be as competitive as possible, as smart as possible in this work, to be able to pivot. But how do you rise up in the ranks, you know, to make good money and advance in your career and still stay to the connection, to the mission, to the driving? Is it ways you find through your job or through community work on the side? And I know this is going to be a different answer for each of you. So I think this will be very, very telling. So I'm going to see whoever wants to start with that one first.
I can
Go
go.
ahead, Ellie.
Yeah, I think for me, this hasn't it hasn't necessarily corresponded with my level at an organization, but it's rather been what organizations I've been at. So AmeriCorps is still the best job I've ever had, although not sustainable for a life. I now have 2 little kids and a house. But, you know, I felt like from that time, again, I was trying to have this more like national impact, but I slowly got further away from those tangible impacts. So like Brookings, again, it was like research reports, GAO, the end result of our work was a report that lived on a website. Then I moved to the Gates Foundation because I was like, okay, they're working with grantees and grantees work with people. So that's a little bit closer. And so I did that. And then I went to public sector consulting. And at that, I was like, okay, now I'm directly working with people and helping them serve their constituents. I worked with the DC Deputy Mayor of Education to build an education to workforce data system, and then the Department of Early Learning and Care in Oregon. And now in my current role, I just got back from a listening tour in the Southeast where we brought together nonprofit leaders for like an hour-and-a-half conversation about their community, what's great about it, what's challenging, what would you do with a large investment. And now I feel like I've like gone up this mountain and come back in terms of getting further and further away from community, to be in a place where I can do that national work, but I feel much more connected than before. So I think this type of question is a great one to bring into your interviews as you think about jobs and think about the impact you want to have, of asking like job interviewer, hiring manager, how do you know you've had an impact? Like, what's the end result? And if they say it's a PDF on the website, that might not be what you're looking for as a former AmeriCorps member.
I would echo a lot of what Ellie said. And when I saw this question, I was brought back to 2014 when I was making the decision to go into corporate consulting. I mean, obviously for the federal government, or, stay in state, local government, nonprofit. And it was a hard decision to make. And it felt like I was choosing the dark side versus the light side at the time. But the conversations that I had with, future employers, Deloitte specifically, was questions around this, which is, what does Deloitte do? Not only, obviously, we are a business that serves the government. That made sense to me. But also, what do we do as an organization to ensure that we were giving back to the communities in which we work in? Because as an AmeriCorps, that was very important for me at the time, and still is today. And so I chose an organization that does that. And throughout the 10 years that I've been there, I've made conscious decisions to choose projects and clients that I feel like align to the mission and vision and values of what I, want to continue. But also, I'm taking a lot of pro bono projects, which, it's so funny. It's always the AmeriCorps alums that are like, sign me up, I'll do the pro bono work, I'll fly to Costa Rica and, fix the straw issue. So choosing an organization that aligns to your values and puts an importance on that, what kind of made it all work for me to kind of go to the dark side. And now I feel like it's not the dark side anymore, which is great.
I would also just add to create the space that you want to live in, right? So if you're working for a corporate or government entity and you're doing some sort of work or project that doesn't necessarily hit you to your core, create the space. There's so many nonprofit opportunities for volunteering. Me personally, I started a nonprofit while I was at George Washington. It was for advocacy. We since then dismantled that, and then I started a mental health advocacy group, and particularly education in underserved communities. That was something that I was always passionate about. And while I'm not a therapist or a psychiatrist, I do recognize that there are only 4% of Black therapists in the nation. I do recognize that we are the least that utilize services. And I saw that need and created the space. And so I think that if you're going to go into corporate or government, that does not mean that you cannot, in your spare time, do things that resonate with you, and definitely continue that, right? That's the core of me, as an AmeriCorps Vista member. That continues on in all of the things that I do, and so I don't think I would be who I am today if I didn't either create the space or create opportunities for me to still be a part of while working for government.
Oh, sorry, Denise, go ahead. The other thing that I would add to everything that's been said is thinking about how you conduct the work. Like, so for example, I work in research and evaluation. So how am I co-developing research or evaluation projects with community members? How am I inviting them into the space? How am I compensating them for their time? Because they are offering you a skill and resource of a lived experience. So thinking about how can I take some of those things that I learned in AmeriCorps and work them into how I do my job, even if it is a little bit further away from a direct service position. Things like doing stakeholder analysis, things like if you're going to do a survey, making sure that you are really focusing on data ownership and consent and letting people know how you're going to use the data. And then also in being in philanthropy, thinking about like, how are we acknowledging the power dynamics that go into being a grantor and a grantee? How are we being trusting partners and doing things like, hey, if you apply and the application process was really grueling, like maybe we can compensate you even if you don't get the award. So just thinking creatively about how to take some of those direct service learnings into your everyday work.
Love that. Anyone else? So we have another question. How can you determine the urgency of applying policy when you're working in a corporate entity? I'm not 100% sure I know what that question is about. Do we need a little more clarification on that? Can David, who put that in there, if you're able to raise your hand and speak, if not, if you can put a clarification in the chat, would be really great. Just so we have an understanding about that. While he's doing that, I don't see another question. It's a question that I'm going to ask, and I remember this because I went back and got my graduate degree around 26. So it was about 3 years after my national service. Were there some specific things that you gained in the classroom that you felt like, oh, this was really helpful because it took some of the experience that I had as a national service member and kind of elevated it and teaching me the right questions or different skill sets? Were there some specific things that you gained in both the courses that you took as well as the capstone that kind of enhanced and built upon your national service experience? And David, feel free to put a little clarifying in there when we get back to your question.
I think if I could just hop in on this one, I think because I was doing my national service work while enrolled at GW, like I kind of said at the beginning of the call, a lot of the work that I was doing at my AmeriCorps Vista site was in evaluation and was in trying to build out this program that was really new to Montgomery County Public Schools at the time. So there were several rounds of evaluations and reworking evaluations and asking questions different ways and trying to understand the different audiences that we were surveying. And there was a program evaluation class that I was in, I think this spring, that I was sort of like on the tail end of my AmeriCorps Vista. And it was like in that moment, everything really clicked. And we got to a really good place with the organization that I was at, where the founder and CEO felt really, really confident in the evaluation tools that we had been able to create in that time. And I don't think that I would have been able to get there without Trachtenberg. Like, no way. Because I was trying to do the work sort of without that kind of mindset and understanding what questions needed to be asked of the questions that I was asking to get to the clear and like clean evaluative tool. And it was exciting. It felt really, really satisfying to be like, okay, we've started here and now we're here. And yeah, Trachtenberg was hugely instrumental in that.
Yeah, I would echo that. I was going to say my program evaluation class with Kathy Newcomer was definitely the best one, where it felt like it did exactly what I wanted out of graduate school. I was working with Centro NIA in Columbia Heights, helping them figure out an evaluation plan that they could run for their after-school tutoring program. So we developed pre and post surveys for students and parents. We thought about some questions to ask and interviews and how to sort of set it all in the context of the data that they were already collecting and had the capacity to collect themselves. So taking that passion and like the work I'd seen in AmeriCorps and bringing an evaluative structure that was like manageable for the organization. And I think the rest of my classes too at Trachtenberg, it was just so grounding in pieces of my life that have come up since, of learning, you know, economics, econometrics, learning how to use SPSS and Stata and understand p-values and things that aren't necessarily like my day-to-day 100%, but I have enough knowledge that I can get, you know, the information I need and read it with a critical eye and a critical lens.
Anyone else on this question? So another question that came in is a clarification on David. He said, what he meant is when you notice that a corporate entity is going against a policy stated rules, how can you determine when and where to apply such policy when you are working in such entity? I'm not sure. That feels like a very specific question. It's a little bit more of a question you might get in your policy classes versus from a career panel. I don't know if anyone wants to touch on it. If not, that might be a better question actually, sir, for speaking with a faculty member towards something in a class, unless anybody wants to tackle that question.
I mean, I might be getting the question wrong, but when I see policy and I see questions about like how, especially if you're a public policy degree, and how do you translate that into a job that might not be on paper very policy related, I will say most recently, like this is all coming back to me of like understanding policy analysis, whereas I didn't really have to do that in the first like 8 years of my career. But now, like a lot of our clients are struggling with, you know, is what they've been doing for a long time actually a policy correct? Like, is it, are they, you know, within the policies that their government agency originally was stood up to do? And so having that background from Trachtenberg of understanding how to look at policy and apply it and make sure that our federal entities are working within them has been really helpful for me. And I've kind of like dug out some folders that weirdly I still have to remember how to do that, and just remember how to kind of then translate that to our clients. So very timely to kind of help clients and think about policy as they are ever changing.
Yeah, and I don't know if this.
I see some nodding. Yeah, Ellie, go on in. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if I'm understanding too, this is like what we did at the Government Accountability Office, where we were auditing federal entities, right? To see, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? So, you know, I looked at the Bureau of Indian Education to see how they were assessing the quality of the school buildings and dealing with maintenance issues. I looked at the Federal Air Marshal Service and how they were deploying air marshals on planes, and if that was in line with stated policies and like rest rules and rest breaks. So yeah, I think similar to what Regan said, like thinking about, you know, all the things I learned at Trachtenberg of how do you objectively analyze a policy document and understand it, and then nuance that understanding with other data points, right? Like conversations with the agency officials, looking at past GAO reports or other sort of policy perspectives on that, to ask the right questions to understand what's happening, what's needed, what are the leverage points to be true to that policy, or like change the policy if it's not working in the way it was intended.
Anyone else on this one? Okay, so I'm going to go to the next one, and this is something I know I talk a lot to students about, you know, AmeriCorps members are often known as having bleeding hearts, right? We feel very, very strongly. And how do you find work-life balance when you're super passionate about your work? And one thing I will chime in and say before I open this up, and those of you who've done coaching with me know I always say this, it's not about work-life balance, it's how do you want work to fit with your life? Which is very different now. I'm a mom who's been working for 30 years versus when I did my national service in my early 20s. And then I lived in the woods of Montana with no electricity. Like the role that work will play in your life will change. And one of the things that I will say, I am myself and our career coach are very committed to doing is helping our students think about, and our alumni, where do you need to be now? How do you balance this in your life? How do you build a career that allows that down the road? So depending on how your life shifts, that you are being as prepared as possible and as marketable as possible. Because I always say, I often say this at orientation, that my job is to help you find a career you love that makes a difference, that pays well. You know, you don't have to be doing good work and not have a fulfilling life and to be able to live on this. So it is something I will just say before opening this up for all of you to answer. I personally have lived through this, and we are very committed as a career services office to support this for our students and our alumni. As I said, we work extensively with our entire network. So with that, I'm going to pause and turn it over to all of you on how you've been able to do that.
I think I can take a stab at this one. So, um, I do a lot of things, and I'm also a mother of two, and I have a husband, and sometimes that's also, it feels like a mother of three. Um, Nonetheless, I will say that I go back to creating the space. Um, Something that I do intentionally per month is make sure that I have on my calendar out of the month days where it's just for about me, days that it's just about taking care of my well-being, centering myself, um, asking myself, what do I need? You know, stay in tune with what you need because, like she said, we do have bleeding hearts. And there have been often times in the past where I did not take care of myself and I was burnt out and tired and needed a break. But as I got older and as I started prioritizing time for myself, I recognized the need for that. And so even if it's just an hour a day, maybe it's incorporating an hour a day into your schedule, putting it on your calendar is very important. If you don't put it on your calendar, you will miss that opportunity to think about, to stop and think about, how am I feeling? That's one thing I have on my calendar at 4 o'clock every day. How am I feeling? And it's really just a moment of mindfulness, taking a deep breath to say, is there anything that I need right now? Is there something that I should be thinking about? And it's just about me. It's not about work. It's not about motherhood. It's not about my husband. It's not about my projects that I'm working on. It's just, what does India need right now? I think if you do that and you make intentional effort, you can get a lot done outside of that.
Oh, sorry, Ellie.
Oh, you go, Emma.
India, I love that response and also just like really appreciate the, I guess, permission to pause during the day. Just pause. That is always very useful advice that I am just recently starting to take. But the other thing I would mention about burnout is thinking about what your yellow flags are for burnout. So like, I think we all know what it feels like to be burnt out and it's not a great feeling, but what are some yellow flags for you to know that you're approaching burnout? So like, for me, it's, I'm not curious anymore. Like, I don't really care to learn anymore about something, even if it's something that I was once curious about. I just want to get a project done. I don't care like what the outcome is. I just want to get it submitted and like pushed out the door. So like those are the yellow flags for me. And it's like, okay, like I need to take a step back, reassess so that I don't reach that like real red flag burnout state.
Yeah, ditto all of that. I feel like I was really lucky in my AmeriCorps service. Our AmeriCorps director used to always tell us you need to put on your own oxygen mask first. You're really of no use to these kids if you haven't done what you need to do to take care of yourself. And I really took that to heart and saw how we were all 70 of us were better able to do our work when we took care of ourselves first. And then early in my career, I had sort of examples of that on either side. At Brookings, my boss was also very into like clear delineations between work and life. And he used to tell us, do not email me after 4 p.m. I like to clear my desk before I go home. He had a Thanksgiving rule where you weren't allowed to do anything or email him the week of Thanksgiving because he wanted to fully take his break. And then on the flip side of that, I worked at a nonprofit where the director, it was serving people that were living in poverty and transitioning out of homelessness. And he slept on the floor for like a decade because he wanted to feel what it was like to be homeless. And he was cranky and he was really difficult to work with. And part of that was, He probably chose to do that because he was a cranky person, and because he did that, he was a more cranky person. It wasn't helpful to the mission. It wasn't helpful to us. And so I think thinking about that too, of like, it's not actually helpful to the people you serve or the work you do for you to be exhausted, for you to be burnt out. It's much more helpful for you to take care of yourself as much as you can, and then show up feeling rested, feeling grounded, and ready to have the energy to do the work.
So,
I
Trevor, go.
believe that
Yeah.
I, outside of the work that I do, which is very enjoyable in and of itself, but obviously, you know, you work a lot, you get tired, that's okay. When I'm not at work, I think there's a kind of mindset shift that I have experienced in the last few years of even if it's just like I'm going for a walk or I'm going to the grocery store, like kind of taking that as like a moment of enjoyment. I mean, I especially love food, so I like being in like the grocery store or like a food mart or things like that. But I think it's sort of that mindset of like, where are you finding joy outside of the work that you are so connected to and that you do feel really passionate about? Like, where else is the joy for you? Is it like painting? Is it writing, riding your bike? Like what sort of ways can you honor yourself in the work that you're doing when you're not doing it?
So the one piece that I'm going to add from a little bit from a career perspective and from an alumni perspective before we get, there's one more question we'll get to, I saw in the chat. So years ago, when I was 22, I had the honor of getting to meet Jane Goodall. And I asked her, I said, how do you not get overwhelmed by everything that's wrong in the world? And this advice she gave me had stayed with me when I used to work directly in public service for the decade, and then for the past 20 years in career services. She said, you just need to find your piece of it. And it was such profoundly simple advice. And it was almost in a lot of ways a play on words, because I often say, I've never met somebody who's more at peace. Like the energy she gives out is just, she's so at peace. And I think about the work that she does. And so that helped me, particularly when I worked directly in the field. But I would say that if you choose to come to our school, being part of our faculty, our staff, our students, and our alumni network, and you see, oh, this is what Emma's doing, this is what Ellie's doing. I mean, right here is just 5 of like almost 7,000 of our Trachtenberg alum. And whatever your issue area, whatever your politics, whatever your, area that you're working in, whatever you care about, we have people out there doing this work in different ways. And it doesn't have to, someone said, Reagan said, it's not on your shoulders, right? It's you're sharing it with this network, and you're investing in these relationships. And it's amazing the number of times I'll have an alum who will say to me, oh yeah, I was in this meeting the other day and there was 2 other Trachtenberg alum. And this is around the country that this happens, where it turns up. So it's an extraordinary feeling that you're a part of this network of people who are all working on finding their piece of it and working together on this. And that has helped me through the years. So we had one other question I want to make sure we get to that came in. That's really an interesting question. And I think is a fascinating one. And I know as national service members, we often had this is, how do you go into unfamiliar communities, unfamiliar spaces, and get a holistic understanding about a town or a city in which you are unfamiliar? And it reminds me, we have an amazing executive in residence program. And Kate, I saw you dropping, maybe you can drop a chat in there. One of our alumni who's in Philadelphia, Omar Woodward, said something which I think really speaks to that. He said, you need to understand where to be fluent and where to be conversational. And especially, I think when you go into, if you haven't watched his meet and greet, he was an executive residence in fall, extraordinary. I love that framework, particularly, I know from my own experience going into new communities, to know where my fluency is and where I'm conversational to be a part of that table. So now let me open it up to all of you on how do you manage that through your work? And I think communities in both literal and figurative communities.
Yeah, I can start. I'm taking it figuratively. My entire job is going into new communities, aka a new client, a new, sub-organization of an agency. And the number one failure as a consultant is if you think you know everything, because you might know a lot. You always know enough to be dangerous. But it's listening to the clients. And I think you learn that in AmeriCorps so much so where you're new, you're dropped in that space. A lot of the times it's outside of community that you like have lived. I went to Burlington, Vermont, have never been there before, did not understand the landscape. And you just have to take a step back and ask questions and listen. Like your first conversation should always be like 90% listen mode. And then then your client or the new organization or the new person that you're talking to begins to trust you because they get to talk about what they need. Then it's kind of your role over time to probe into, well, is that really what you need? Or, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And that gets us back to the conversation we were having earlier about program eval and how do you get to the root of the problem and what you're trying to evaluate. So AmeriCorps is the perfect role. And like when you're job interviewing, like that's a great point that you can make is like, I understand how to understand people quickly.
Yes, I will add to that. We recently, over the weekend, we did a mental health brunch panel that we do every year, a couple of times a year. And it's always interesting to see who's in the crowd. It's predominantly catered to minorities, but we have a lot of other cultures that come in. We have a lot of Caucasian individuals that come in. And one of a fine young lady, she was a Caucasian woman, and she asked the question, how obviously, she said, obviously I'm not Black, but how can I help in some way of these issues? And one of the panelists said, number one, listen to us. And number two, take what we are saying as face value. Believe us in what we're saying to you. And I think that second part is so true. I think a lot of times as policy people, we might see a problem, but we don't necessarily see it from their lens. We see it from just the lens of solving, but not necessarily the lens of how does this deeply impact us? And immerse yourself in that, right? Immerse yourself in the culture that you're serving so that you not only understand the problem, but you understand directly how it's impacting someone.
Anyone else want to add to this?
Just to say ditto all of that. Again, we just did these listening sessions where we were literally going into like 7 different communities and trying to understand them as people who, did not live there, were not from there, had not visited before. And as I mentioned, we had 3 questions of just saying what's great here, what's challenging, what would you do with an investment? And other than that, we didn't really speak. And these were 90-minute conversations. And often at the end, folks would come up to us and they would be like, that's so great. We're never like able to have these conversations with funders. Because I think often, especially in philanthropy, funders come in thinking they know the answer already and trying to direct folks how to do it instead of saying, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to live here. I don't know what you need. You tell me. So I think starting with that listening ear, which AmeriCorps is a great backbone for.
That leads me into, I would say, the final question just to leave with. If you were somebody sitting in their shoes right now, whether it's an admitted student or a prospective student, and what, national service, and coming into the program, what one piece of advice would you say for them as they're making decisions about what's next into their academic graduate career and career? Maybe something you wish you knew when you were in that situation.
I wish I knew that I wasn't alone in my confusion. I didn't start picking that up until like the last semester. It was like, and then it was like talking to other people. It was like, oh wow, you're going through the same thing. And so a lot of times I was mostly talking to teachers and tutors, but not necessarily my classmates. And so, I would say get to know your classmates as well. And you'll find that you guys have a lot in common. And so you'll find partners and, people that you can relate to just by connecting with them early on in the program.
Yeah, I would say use the career services. I'm not like a plant or a paid ad, but truly they are incredible. And then also think about, forget it was some GW event, but I can't remember which one. And the advice was to think about like a line that you won't cross like in your career, like things that are going against your values and the things that we did learn in AmeriCorps. And even if like there's a lot of money being offered, like I wrote this down in grad school and I said I would never cross this line, like write that down and stick to it. Because I've used that kind of as a North Star in thinking about where I want to work and how I want that job to fit into my life and also like feel good about what I'm doing. I want to go to work and feel proud about the work I'm doing. So I would recommend doing that.
Yeah, I would say what I wish I knew, my advice to you all and my former self is that it's okay to not know what you want to be when you grow up. And it's okay to feel discomfort in, stepping into an internship or a job and being like, oh, this isn't the right place for me. That's data, that's information. Think about why, what feels bad about that. And then take that to your next interview process once you get there and continue to augment and find your right path. And then each of those steps is like a helpful perspective to have because now you know how that place or that sector or that line of work or that position is, which will serve you for the rest of your career.
I would echo pretty much what Ellie just said, and very tactically. Like, this is if you've just started or you're about to start Trachtenberg or if you have a year left, that is so much time to do multiple internships. And you might come in knowing what you want to do for the rest of your life. I know I thought I did. I got a 2-year internship that after about 3 weeks, I was like, nope. So have the courage to change your mind and change it often. It's a great 2 years if you have the luxury to be able to kind of switch. So that kind of to Ellie's point, you not only know what you want to do a little bit more when you get out of it, but you can also use all of those different perspectives that you've learned along the way to what your ultimate job is, or your next job at least. I wish I would have done that more because I think that's what led me to pick something I swore I would never do when I joined Trachtenberg.
I would say first, and this is because I am in DC and because I love this city so much, take advantage of the location of this school. I was very fortunate to kind of know the area well enough because I've been here for a while. But if you're moving to DC or if you haven't lived in DC or if you're kind of new to where GW is located and sort of where it is sort of centered around, explore, get out to events or to cultural places, restaurants, like find opportunities to get to know this city and get to know the resources that are available within the city, because I think that that can also lend itself to opportunities after finishing school, volunteering or like finding opportunities to kind of connect with, if you're interested in staying in DC, which is a pretty common track line, kind of immerse yourself in this city and find where you fit in it too, and where you feel good in it. And then I think the thing that I have said since completing a year of AmeriCorps Vista, and I say constantly to our programs and to the members that I'm meeting, is like your skills that you're developing in your AmeriCorps service or that you have developed in the past are hugely transferable. It's just about how you make that clear and how you present that experience when you're seeking out jobs or internships or different opportunities.
So with that, unless anyone has anything else, I want to wrap up and just thank our alumni. You all continually inspire me. I love hearing your work, your impact, your wisdom. These alum are indicative of all 7,000 of our alum that are out there making the world a better place. I'm a little partial because these are some national service alums, so that's a little bit of my own connection, but I just want to thank you all tremendously for your valuable insights. I know that Mindy will be sending you all follow-up regarding from an admissions and recruitment perspective. If you have further questions, we're always here for you as you navigate these decisions. So thank you so much.